we had this one protocol which was called emergency protocol. If I set the signal, that means I am certain that I'm being under surveillance, I'm running. And if they set the signal, they tell me get out of the country immediately, simply because we have reason to believe that you're going to get arrested very soon. That signal was a red dot. So one day it was early in the morning, it was dark. There's the red dot. And we have reason to believe that the FBI is investigating you and you're in danger of being arrested. I got to a point when I couldn't stall anymore. And this was when another morning waiting for the train, and there's this man that's coming from my right. He comes up very close to me and whispers into my ear, "You gotta come out, or else you're dead."
Jumping back in, so as we just highlighted, you made that decision to become a KGB agent. And I guess next steps from there, I'd be really interested in hearing, what was the training process like? And from there, we'll compare it to CIA and everything. But more considering, what were those first few steps right after you finally said yes?
Well, first I want to debunk a myth. There's still people who believe there was some kind of a village outside of Moscow where they build out a village or a little town that looks like the United States and you're trained there.
Not the case.
If I wasn't there, it doesn't exist because I was one of the elite agents, and that's no bragging. It's just a fact. As a matter of fact, and this is information that comes out of the KGB archives, directly out of the KGB archives. In the late 70s to mid 80s, 10 of us were recruited and trained. I don't even know if they all were deployed. 10, that's it. And I was one of the 10. And whether there was one I met, also a German, he came to the U.S. with his wife as an illegal. I don't know, neither does the FBI, what happened to the other 8. I would guess that some of them, if not the majority of them, had to abort because that job had failure written all over the place. Mm-hmm. So I was elite. So if they didn't train me in that village, that would have been a huge mistake. So the training was fundamentally one-on-one, with one exception. A lot of their technicians didn't speak German or English, so they needed a translator. But it was one-on-one in private, very expensive. Mm-hmm. And the training in tradecraft that I received in Moscow was top-notch. I mean, you couldn't have been any better. It has been confirmed by folks that know this kind of stuff, like the CIA, FBI. The training in English was sufficient, but it required a lot of self-study on my part and being very diligent in doing phonetics exercises. I had, while in Berlin, I just got myself a tutor and started from scratch, and then I went on from there. But when it became clear that I had an unusual ability, they moved me to Moscow, and there I worked with a tutor who was an American-born woman, and I spent once or twice a week in her presence, and we primarily talked about stuff. She couldn't really help me with the phonetics as much as a male could have, but I told you about Morris Cohen. I had the opportunity to work with Morris for about 6 months, and that helped a lot. And then my own phonetics exercises. So a lot of that training, also the base training, was fundamentally my own initiative. I was required to expand my knowledge of the world, history, the arts, just become a really well-rounded human being. So they paid for my theater tickets, and they made me go to the museums and so forth. And I loved that part of the training. And also read as much as I can about the United States, what was available in East Germany in those days. If it was available in Russian, I couldn't understand it. So that training, the cultural training, the prep, and also the psychological training might as well not have existed. It was either insufficient or misleading. They didn't know what they didn't know.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that, the only experts in the United States that were available in those days were diplomats, right? Agents that were under diplomatic cover who operated in the United States. There was no other expert. No, whatever they said was the rule. And they interacted with Americans. They had a decent understanding by comparison of American culture and American life, but they never learned what it's like to be an American. So I repeat this over and over again. It's a very good analogy. So in Atlanta, Georgia, there's this huge aquarium that, people are fascinated. You can spend hours watching all these fishies there. They have even sharks in there. And you see, how fish behave. And does that mean you know what it's like to be a fish? Nope. So I had aquarium visitors trying to train me how to be a fish. I was going to be a fish. They didn't know what it's like to be a fish. They didn't know how to apply for a job. They didn't know how to worry about keeping a job. They didn't know about the dating scene. They didn't, because to the extent I know, they were all married. They either came with their family and they lived together in the Soviet compound up north in the northern part of Manhattan, or they left their family at home. They wouldn't send singles. So they didn't really mingle. So whatever advice they gave me, they either couldn't give me advice or they gave me wrong advice simply because they were so impressed with their own knowledge compared to everybody else who knew nothing, that they just thought they knew it all. They did not know what they did not know in life. This is more important than knowing what you do know. Because if you don't know what you don't know, you're going to make a lot of mistakes inadvertently. So there was no training, and there was never a hint. I just volunteer that was never a hint to find a way to get around a lie detector test, to fool a lie detector test. That's typically people think, well, yeah, you're the KGB, you could fool a lie detector test. I couldn't, by the way. That was not the point anyway. So that was the training. I also had a little bit of training in optical recognition of from a long distance of ships' profiles, because there was one task that they told me that every KGB agent had who operated in a foreign country. We were all assigned a military object to just watch, nothing else, just watch and see if there are signs of preparation for war.
Really?
Yeah, I was assigned the weapons station Earl on the New Jersey shore. Obviously, I never found any preparation for war because there weren't any. But Andropov was paranoid. The whole Soviet leadership was paranoid, particularly when Ronald Reagan was president, because he was a tough talker, and they were really, really afraid that Ronald Reagan might actually push the button.
Yeah, I know you highlighted Star Wars program, which I found incredibly interesting.
And the Evil Empire speech.
Yeah, could you detail what that program was and why that would be?
Well, Star Wars at the time, the United States was well ahead in nuclear development and would have been able to shoot down oncoming missiles, which, upset the balance, the nuclear balance that existed. The mutual assured destruction disappeared. It was one-sided. So that made the Soviet Union vulnerable to a potential aggression, right? Because if they fire back, we would just kill the missiles like, the Israelis do in these days. Mm-hmm. I don't know to what extent the Russians have caught up, but I think we are still technologically advantaged because the Russians historically had very good theoreticians, but putting out high-quality products based on the theories was never their strength. They shot people into space with rockets that were held together with that tape. What is that? Duct tape. I'm exaggerating, but their technology was bare bones.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of tradecraft training, as you highlighted, it is actually pretty notorious that the KGB was in some ways levels ahead in certain areas. So can you maybe speak to the training that you got in tradecraft, maybe?
Yeah, okay. And this was based on what I had to learn, what I needed to know. That had a different flavor, and some things I didn't have to learn. For instance, surveillance detection. They taught me how to drive in Moscow, and they figured maybe I should try surveillance detection while driving. And I told them that ain't gonna work. Number one, in Moscow traffic, you have to pay attention to traffic. You can't look in the rearview mirror all the time and see, and then remember what license plate you see. So that didn't work. On top of it, surveillance detection with a vehicle works best if there's somebody ahead of you and stations themselves by the roadside and then sees who's following you. And then you go to another place and that person is going to be ahead of you again. That would work. Anyway, so we skipped that. The surveillance detection that I was taught was outstanding. That was all on foot, wandering around in the city, taking public transportation, going in and out of stores for 3 hours. And I was trained by, I believe, the best. I was told the fellow who trained me and then ran the exercises that we conducted was in charge of the entire section of the KGB. This guy was a magician. He one day showed me what he can do. He said, "Follow me." We were someplace in Moscow. "Just follow me for a few minutes and then watch what I'm doing." So after 5 minutes, he stopped and he said, "So did I do anything unusual?" I said, "No." And he showed me. There was an elevated flower bed, made out of wood. The flowers were in there, and he took out a cartridge he put in there. Misdirection. I don't know what he did. He may have done something that made me look up in the sky, and then at that point, he was a magician. Okay?
Yeah.
So I didn't get that kind of training. But, he told me that to make the city I lived in, my playground, I had to know the city as well as anybody. And so in Moscow, for instance, I started out taking the subway to every station, walking around and looking for spots that would be candidates for being stops during surveillance detection, but also for putting graphic signs. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And then I put routes together, 3-hour routes. It was 3 hours. And the route, you had to have some sort of a reason why you're going to a place. It can't be just like wandering around, taking one train and another train. You had to go places. Mm-hmm. Even though if you are engaged in surveillance detection and you're going to a movie theater, you're looking at the schedule, and then you're going to a store, and then you take the subway and going to another place, it's you're signaling to people who know espionage that you are doing surveillance detection, but there's no proof to it. This is not proof, because you could have been just some crazy guy. You couldn't deny everything, right? Yeah. So you had to have a cover for why you're showing up here, there, and everywhere. And so my favorite, and there were some things that were absolutely not allowed. This, you never look back. But also walking towards a display window of a department store to see in the reflection who is following you. That was not allowed either, because that's a giveaway. Mm-hmm. So what you had to find out is places where you're either stationary, such as waiting for a bus, where when surveillance must never leave a gap. In other words, there's a team that's following you, and they change the lead. So there's always somebody else closest to you, but that somebody must not lose sight of you, because
For the pass off.
yes, if that is a window, you can do a brush pass, or you can also put a chalk mark on the wall. So they need to be close. So in other words, your task is to be stationary, as I said, just waiting for a bus. Somebody needs to be there because they need to get on the bus with you, right? Otherwise, you are alone on the bus, you sit next to somebody. So, or when it's legit for you to turn around. And big supermarkets, department stores, it's quite legit to wander all over the place, this way, that way, touch something, look around that way. And my favorite spot, and I'm still proud of it, because that one I stopped. I had several routes, but that one I used in every route. So there is this road next to a park in a residential neighborhood, and the road goes down the hill and curves to the left. And at the bottom of that hill, there's one of those old-fashioned phone booths. And you walk in there, you open the door, and you have to turn around to pick up the receiver. So you legitimately look back. I caught whoever was following me every time. So, and the bottom line was, if you see the same face twice, you know that you're being followed. Mm-hmm. And we had 6-7 exercises where my Moscow handler came to my apartment in the morning and told me, time to see if you're being followed. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention elevators. Somebody has to be on the elevator with you. They need to know where you're getting off, right? So I would go, do my 3 hours, and then write my report. And at the end, let's assume it was 7. The score was 7-0. I won every time. I even analyzed correctly when I had to guess, and you can't prove a negative, that I was not being followed. But when I didn't see the same face twice, and I had very, very good memory for faces in those days, I said, no, not being followed. And the guy who ran this program told me that I was one of the best. It was a competition because these guys wanted to win. I mean, it was their profession, right? And the one episode I like to share because it's kind of funny and showed me how psychological misdirection can be very effective. Part of psychological misdirection is also having a woman do a task that you expect a man to do. But this one was as follows. In Moscow in those days, in Russia, the cigarettes were very cheap. They were like 20 kopecks a pack or something like that. And so it was quite usual for, let's say you standing at the bus stop and see somebody smoking, you can ask them for a cigarette. They would give you one. It is nothing. It's like giving somebody a light, right? So I'm waiting for the bus stop, and somebody comes by and says, "Kurich means smoke," and I gave him a cigarette, and it turns out he was one of the folks who followed me. I was told afterwards. Yeah, clever, very brilliant, because he was aware that he was vulnerable, right? So he just was in my face. Well, it couldn't have been him. But this was the best training I got, and it helped me when I quit the KGB and when there was this specter and hanging over me that the FBI was following me or the KGB might be following me after I told them that I'm not obeying the orders. So when I did surveillance detection for like 3 months and there was nobody ever after me, I knew I was in the clear. And I was right.
So let me ask this then, because I think what's so incredibly interesting is, and again, we talked about this earlier, is the idea of you guys, the KGB is extremely siloed with their agents from the top down, and kind of that, you're a one-man army type of deal. The CIA's training facility is the farm, very notorious. Yeah. And I think that's probably where that idea that you guys would have this fake U.S. city outside, it'd be like the KGB version of the farm.
No, excuse me interrupting. The other agents were trained in classes. I don't know if they had a farm, but the one-on-one was only us. Because they shouldn't. I shouldn't know another illegal, for crying out loud. We were. The moment I signed up, even though I wasn't told this, but the moment I signed up for the KGB, I became a Soviet state secret that had to be kept from as many people as possible, particularly other illegals, because illegals were vulnerable to defection more so than, particularly if they did a good job. Like if you watch the Americans, they got that right. They were talking about why don't we stay here instead of going back home? Yeah, if you are successful at that job, impersonating an American, and if you're doing this well, you want to just continue with that life, don't you? Mm-hmm. They knew there was vulnerability, and there was always talk about a 10-year stint, roughly. We had a shelf life. Again, I don't have to repeat it again. It's quite clear. So that is why we were so isolated.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that does make sense. So I guess in terms of tradecraft.
Oh, do you want to know about the other stuff?
Yeah.
Sure. So communication was two ways, and it was the most awkward part of my existence as an agent. I got my information from Moscow through shortwave, encrypted via Morse code. Mm-hmm. So no number station, no like when they say 7, 5, 4. The reason for that was not Morse code can deal with bad reception much better than the spoken word. But so it was shortwave, which has unlimited reach, and you can't determine who is listening to it. It's out there in the ether for anybody to listen. You know where it comes from, but so what? Mm-hmm. So that training was also very good, and it took a while for me to be able to write down, and Morse code was all numbers, no no letters, only the call signals. There were call signals at the beginning of the session. They had a couple of letters and a number or something like that. It means, this is for you. But everything else was, because it was encrypted. You don't do an encryption, to my knowledge, with letters. So it was all digits. And it took quite a while until I got to a point where I could, where the speed was, I could listen and write down at a speed that meant I wouldn't have to spend 2 hours listening to this. It went really fast. Mm. It took once a week, maybe 3-4 months at least. And then I was taught 2 manual algorithms to encrypt and decrypt. That was awkward and lengthy, but the manual algorithms were initially used to avoid using a one-time pad. And you know what a one-time pad is, but for the benefit of the audience, this is a set of numbers that subdivided into groups of 5 that are used to do some mathematics with the numbers that you receive, and at the end you get another set of numbers that then translates into letters and signs and all of that. And a one-time pad, obviously, if you're in possession of that, that's spy paraphernalia. And so they sent me out with a manual with something I had in my head. And after 4 years, I had to learn yet another algorithm because that algorithm had become vulnerable to encryption at the time with technology. Nowadays, it may not last as long. I don't know if it's still true, but it may well be that even nowadays, one-time pads, if you use one sheet only once, and these are sheets, the sender has an identical set. These are sheets that should be used only once. If you use them only once, you still cannot decrypt it. But if you reuse them, anyway, the last 2 years, because there wasn't enough time to teach me another algorithm, they sent me back to New York with a one-time pad. Now the size was about like this, and it was like a little notepad.
Was it like similar to a microdot? Or what the?
No. Microdot is much smaller. Microdot you can only read.
Sorry. I thought you were going like saying like okay.
No, it was. This is the real size, roughly like this.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
It's like a little notepad, and there were no numbers on it. You had to develop it. I had to use iodine to just put a little iodine on top, brush it with iodine, and then the numbers appeared. But it still was paraphernalia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I also was an amateur photographer at the time, so they made me do a little bit of photography, develop my own pictures and so forth. I didn't have to use that in reality. What else? Oh, microdot. They taught me how to make a microdot. I never used that. Again, what a microdot is, you take a picture of a document, you develop that negative, and then you use a microscope in reverse to make it really, really small, like the size of a pin of a needle, and you can put this under a postage stamp and send stuff back, not to Moscow, to some other country where somebody picks it up and eventually sends it to Moscow.
It's incredible. It's so crazy.
It is crazy. Somehow we didn't use it. When I had that much information to send out, we used a dead drop. That was part of the training as well, finding dead drop spots and practicing meetings and dead drops. Not a lot. Eventually, I had to sort of figure out. Now, what I had to do during the training, I had to find sites and describe them. So sites that where you can put a container, where the container would not be out of place, where somebody might not want to pick it up and throw it away, and where you most likely are in the American term. Every time I think of it, I can't think of it. I translate from the German. It's called a dead zone, where you disappear behind. You go around a corner or of a bush and you drop something and nobody sees what you just did. So I had to describe those, and I got high compliments for being very good at finding these places and describing them so that they're easy to find. And then secret writing, there was a protocol to it. We used for secret writing. We used we used a copy paper that was manufactured by, let's say, go to Walmart, buy a notepad, and then impregnate a number of pages with some trace of a chemical, whatever it was. They never told me what it was. So with a trace of that chemical, but when there was pressure applied and that chemical moved to another piece of paper, it could be developed and you could actually read it. They once showed me what it looks like. The protocol was very, very rigid. Okay, I had to use a glass surface. Well, this is how it worked. Okay, so first I write, I prepare a sheet of mail paper, and a regular airmail paper, a sheet that you put into an envelope to send out via airmail. I had to prepare that, and for that I was supposed to use gloves. Well, I didn't like gloves, so I handled everything like this. No fingerprints. So I had to put this on a glass plate that was really clean. Everything had to be super clean, and wipe it like this across with the back of my hand. So to just get everything off of it, and obviously I had to wash my hands, and then write an open text. Obviously, I sent this to somebody. So if I sent this to Miguel Fernandez in Mexico, I would say, "Dear Miguel." At one point, I actually wrote that in Spanish. But anyway, so "Dear Miguel, I'm glad to hear that you're feeling better. I have improved too. Thank God. I got another job." Like, just come up with, like, this was really easy to do, right? That just you write something that makes people think that you know the person that you're writing it to. Then, if you have to encrypt something like addresses, anything that could be indication that could help somebody, counterintelligence, to find the individual that I'm describing, not the recipient, but if I describe, for instance, somebody who I suggest for recruitment, I give name, address, and all that. So that had to be encrypted. Any identifying information. So I had to do this manual encryption, and then I would also write down what eventually I would transmit. So I know I was limited to 2 pages of paper. So I wrote it all down, and I had the draft of this text lying next to me. Now I put here's the glass plate. I put the receiving piece of paper with the open text on top of the glass plate. Then I put the piece of copy paper on top, and then I put another piece of paper on top, and with a number 2 pencil in block letters, write very carefully, not with too much pressure, write down the message that would be copied onto the paper that was mailed. That took quite a while. And also they showed me what it looks like when it's developed. And I understood why it was a number 2 pencil and you couldn't put too much pressure while writing. I had to use a light hand because it was at the edges was readable, but smudged. Yeah, this was very, very sophisticated chemical technology.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is incredible.
But it was a pain in the neck. And before, it took a while to even get the letter in the kind of shape that you can mail it. Then the protocol was to do a surveillance detection route before I put the letter in a post office box.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically, if I did this on a Saturday, while I had a job during the week, I didn't have enough time.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, and I was never available. Every other Saturday, I wasn't available for social interaction.
So let me ask then, were you surprised, you mentioned this earlier, that you guys didn't really get any weapons training. Were you surprised that going through the tradecraft process that there wasn't any weapons training to follow that, or did you understand that likely it just wasn't necessary?
I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it. It was just not, it wasn't in play. And I did have some self-defense training, not to fight with the FBI, but let's say because I occasionally, for some dead drop operations, I was in places where you could be subject to an attack. And particularly if you were subject to an attack and then and you were in the possession of compromising material. Suppose you pick up an oil can with money in it and a passport and stuff like that. So they wanted me to be able to fight off, when a robber or just one of those evil characters. And when I arrived in New York, I kept on practicing. Eventually, I gave up on it. And weapons training, it was just not in my universe. And think about it. It would have been entirely useless. Particularly, in New York, even in those days, you had to, in order to be able to buy a weapon, you had to were subjected to a background search. Useless. Mm-hmm. And shoot the FBI. That's just plain stupid. Who would you shoot?
Yeah, no, I think it kind of comes from the idea of like the, KGB, CIA, like assassin idea. Whether
well, we had assassins, but I never met one. I believe. Mm-hmm. Thank God I never met one. And the folks that I worked with were all gentlemen. They most likely knew that there was assassinations going on, but I think the assassination team was a very elite team, the same way it is now. It's mostly GRU, the Russian military intelligence. They're kept secret, and they have to be. All right, they're in their own universe, so the two never overlap.
Mm-hmm. What weaknesses were you guys told, or were you understanding about the CIA at the time? Because you guys are consistently playing that. I always love to describe it as the geopolitical chess match. War obviously is two soldiers, they'll go at it, but espionage is a whole different domain of that chess match, that gentleman's game that's happening between the two. Were there weaknesses or ideas highlighted about the CIA they were told in terms of how you guys were going to operate?
No, we didn't talk about the CIA, but implicitly, I believe they knew that they were superior to the FBI. And there's some indirect and direct evidence that I have that that was actually true. So we conducted 6 dead drop operations in New York, mm-hmm. and none of them failed, except for the very last one. We'll get to that one. None of them failed. And, I was never under surveillance, but they would have been under surveillance, and they did not have to abort. It was indication that somehow they managed to sort of shake the tail. Or, and this is the direct evidence, I have a friend who used to work counterintelligence in those days in New York, and he told me that for any dead drop operations, the Soviets, the KGB threw volume at it, and they didn't have enough people to cover the one that eventually was free and was not being followed. Mm-hmm. Now, how they communicated that to this person, and the person who was maybe to give me something, I have no idea. I don't know the details, but they clearly had the advantage of numbers in New York. It wasn't there were a lot of UN employees, and if they weren't KGB, they were at least cooperating closely with the KGB. They were all suspects. So if anyone leaves wherever they were, they had to be followed, and the FBI ran out of people.
So how would you compare then the CIA and the KGB at the time in terms of ability, capabilities?
Well, the supposed advantage the KGB had was illegals. The CIA never had a single illegal in Russia, and the surveillance was in Moscow was much tighter. To my knowledge, there was only one person, a CIA employee who was an agent who was never surveilled. It was a female, misdirection. Mm-hmm. But the CIA really had a disadvantage, also because Moscow was not necessarily a very inviting target. Who the heck wanted to go to Russia? And that's why you couldn't have illegals. Both sides, the most successful agents for both sides were moles, both for the CIA as well as for the KGB. But the KGB had a slight advantage, particularly as they thought if diplomatic relations would be severed, and there was a good chance there was a war going on in the late 80s between CIA and KGB, where every time a diplomat was caught, they were kicked out of the country, and sometimes it were entire teams, and then there was retaliation. And it's on record that Andropov was worried about diplomatic relations being broken up altogether. And in those days, Ames and Hansen, both moles, were the most successful spies for the KGB in the United States. And if the diplomats are gone, who would be able to receive that material that they were trying to smuggle to Moscow? Just us, the illegals. If diplomatic relationship had been broken, there was no presence, none, in Moscow. So, but that just didn't come into play. Mm-hmm. It was the possibility. So I think the game was probably, if you're looking at something like a baseball game, the KGB won by just one run.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it.
That's why I'm now claiming that I'm pretty much an American.
So what? I guess I want to start getting into some of your operational time, but when, at any point, but did you feel that you kind of understood in terms of what the ask was or what the operation was going to be?
No, I in hindsight, I didn't know. I was misled. Now, during the training, initially, I think they were very sincere. They told me that I was supposed to work in international policy espionage, get close to, befriend people who work in the State Department or at least influence foreign policy, think tanks like the Hudson Institute, which is still in existence. They named a few others. And so that was, I very much believe, sincere because of the plan A that they had in mind. The plan A was to get me to the U.S. With that passport and acquire the driver's license and get a job, work for a while, and then get a passport, a genuine. We wouldn't use false passports for these kinds of affairs, not even highly sophisticated forgeries. They had to be genuine. And they told me this is what's going to happen. This is where we would have had the good life as though James Bond from the East. I was going to go to a German-speaking country such as Switzerland or Austria and open up some kind of a business, whatever, bookstore, antique books or something, where you could pretend that you could have made a lot of money, not to the Swiss or Austrian authorities, but to people you meet in the United States. And after 2 years, send me back to the KGB was very good at money laundering. They would have put maybe $5 million into my company. I could come back to the U.S. as a quite wealthy American. And at that point, I can join any country club, maybe one that's next to the Pentagon, knowing now how well I played with others, I would have made some really interesting friends and would have become a quite dangerous spy. Well, plan A failed. I made a couple of mistakes with a passport application. We practiced filling out an application in Moscow, and we just didn't go thoroughly through the questions and how I should answer the questions. But ultimately, it was my mistake. Are you interested in how that happened?
Yeah, I was going to say, can you deep dive that? But then also with that, can you explain the concept of ghost names or how you guys are achieving these identities? Because, I heard the concept of ghost names, and it was so fascinating how, I think a lot of people think these names are just made up or these characters.
No. Well, as you know, I didn't use a ghost name. I mean, if you call, let's see. If a ghost name is acquiring the identity of somebody who left the country many years ago and passed away someplace else as an adult, or somebody who left the country and lives someplace in the bushes somewhere as somebody who is not in touch with civilization, or somebody who passed away at an early age. That is, by the way, Russians still steal identities today. If that's a ghost name, I just told you how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought like manufactured names. When it came to the real important tasks, they would always use ghost names. Yes, and so where were we stuck? So I was operating under the ghost name, and I still am, of Jack Barsky, and I was going to get a genuine U.S. passport. So, and they told me, and that was a mistake. That was their mistake. They insisted that I go apply in person instead of through the mail. I had all the information. I could have applied through the mail. I had a birth certificate and I had the driver's license. That's all I needed, and a filled out application that would have passed. Okay? Maybe not, because the mistake that I made was the most severe one, but that would have required for somebody to actually study every application that comes in through the mail. So here's the thing. I'm showing up at Rockefeller Center in person with my 2 documents and the filled out application, handed in to the person behind the counter, and he told me to go wait for a while, and then he waved me over, and he had the stuff, my application and the documents in front of him, and he said, I have some doubt about your identity. And that was a interesting sentence to be confronted with.
Yeah.
And my quick wit decided, oh shit, I know I made a mistake. And if I had thought about this more thoroughly, I would have avoided that one. In the meantime, he was saying, you can prove your ID, but just fill out this additional questionnaire. And he sent me back, and I said, okay, great. In the meantime, I had figured out very quickly what there were 2 mistakes on that application. So I was working as a messenger at the time, as a bike messenger. And bike messengers were paid really good money because nobody wanted to do that job. It was really dangerous. In New York, in those days, there were no bike lanes. You had to be right mixing it up with traffic, with the buses, the trucks, the motorcycles, the taxis, the crazy taxi drivers. And this was a very dangerous job. And I once escaped a significant accident that could have cost me my life. But I got all the way through. But so, and when it asks on the application, what kind of job do you do? I wrote messenger. Yeah, okay. And then there were a couple of questions that were not mandatory. When are you planning? Where are you planning to go, and when are you planning to leave? And they were voluntary. You didn't have to write anything in, so I left them blank. So here was a person who looks over my application and he sees messenger, and he knew that all messengers make minimum wage. I made a lot more than minimum wage. And he doesn't know where he's going, and he doesn't know when he's going there. Something is wrong.
Red flag.
Red flag, could be criminal, right? So in the meantime, I'm going back to the back room, and I'm looking at the questionnaire, still confident that I can get through this. And the first question shook my confidence to the bone. What high school did you attend? Now, my backstory has a high school, Peter Stuyvesant, School for the Gifted. Stupid choice. But I write this down. They will arrest me eventually because they're going to check with the school. And there's no right. Jack Barsky is such an unusual name. Guaranteed there was no Jack Barsky at Peter Stuyvesant. So that's when my quick wit saved me from ultimate disaster. I went back to the counter. There was nobody there, standing there, and I started mumbling to myself and actually using some interesting curse words, not directed at somebody, but I used shit and who needs this stuff? All this stupid bureaucracy, for crying out loud. I went up to the window and I grabbed my application and the documents and walked out. So this is where luck comes in. That fellow either didn't remember my name or he didn't think it was important to report my name to counterintelligence. Because nobody ever chased after me.
I was going to say, do you think that was probably the closest in your time that you came in terms of?
There was something possibly closer. This was the dumbest thing I ever made. It was my first trip back to Moscow. So I had worked in the messenger's office, and on a Friday, there were all kinds of drugs on the table. Okay, people were just like exchanging illegal drugs.
Especially back then.
All kinds of pills with all kinds of colors. I don't know if there was cocaine in play, but I bought a few joints, and I smoked joints, and I tried them. Eventually, I didn't like it. It smelled too much, and it made me eat, and
no doubt.
But at that time, I also had a girlfriend, and this is for adults only. Sex was better after we both smoked the joint. So I figured I want to try this with my German wife, who I was still in love with. Okay, yeah, this is all the dichotomy and the sociopathic aspect of my life, right? So I decided to take some marijuana with me. So I figured to put it into a condom and put the condom in a toothpaste tube, so wouldn't be detected. Well, I didn't know that dogs can smell through all of this. So if a dog had sniffed my luggage at Heathrow Airport, I would have been discovered with smuggling drugs in a country where I couldn't pass a single interview. And I would have failed in life because the Soviets wouldn't have wanted me back. And I would have wound up in jail. Or I don't know, maybe there would have been an attempt to turn me in some way because they would have found out that I was traveling with forged documents, German passports typically, or maybe Canadian, but yeah, that was the closest that I ever came to being busted, and I believe that's not in my book.
Yeah,
I'm still ashamed of it.
I mean, that one, but it's a small. We were talking about this. It's a small little.
Yeah,
you're feeling good in the moment type of slip ups that can lead to that.
It's the when they were looking for well controlled attention for adventure. This was not well controlled. It was out of control. Mm-hmm. I got to a point where I felt invincible because I just got out of that mess I was in at the passport office, and I was still untouched. Okay, so now let's do it. And and it was useless because my German wife actually couldn't handle the smoke. So that's one of the bizarre, somewhat comedic aspects of my spy life. But these two were when I got really close. The third one, I got reasonably close when I was valedictorian at a U.S. college, and I gave a speech, the graduation speech, in front of 4,000 people at the Feld Forum, and nobody was interested in talking and asking some question of the individual who was about 10, 12 years older than the average graduate, and who ran through the program in 3 years. And some professors knew that I was a fast guy. And nobody made small talk afterwards. They hung out. I wasn't even featured in the school newspaper. And just the name named. And I got away with that one too. That was my ambition running away with me. And I needed to get an A with everything, in everything, because I had bragged about it to a girl when I had all A's in the first semester. I said, I'm just going to ace the whole thing. Yeah, so, immature. And I was already I was 10 years older than you are now. So I don't think you would be committing such idiotic sins.
Be surprised. I don't know. I said you'd be surprised. Sometimes it gets in front of you.
You never know. You never know.
So yeah, as you were highlighting, you had that first mishap that happened when you were trying to get the identification.
Yeah.
And then, lucky enough, you were able to.
Can I connect it back to where it started when I said plan A, and that plan where they said this was really honest? They didn't get off of this. They said, now we're going to go to plan B, because they knew that other than that mishap, I did really well because I managed to get the driver's license and the Social Security card, even though the instructions that they gave me, none of them worked. So I had a job and I could fend for myself. I didn't even need an influx of money from them. That they appreciated this very much. So they knew I was well trained and I was battle hardened already. Didn't know about the drugs. So they said, plan B now, go to college and then, study economics. And then, you become wealthy, and operating on Wall Street. That was a good plan B, except I changed it. I unilaterally changed it when I started college in the U.S. We had to take, some mandatory basic courses. As one of them was information systems, and I had to learn a computer language. And I said, "Oh my God, this is so good! I'm going to change my major. I'm from economics. I'm going to go to information technology." And I told them that. And they didn't have a problem with it because they saw that that's where the future is. They just didn't really quite know how to operate in the cyberspace.
Yeah, they could have sent you out to Silicon Valley. And
no, at one point when I was a programmer for MetLife, I had access to medical records of several million employees of companies that were in the military industrial complex. And in 1988, when I was, 1986, when I was back in Moscow for my last visit, I told them that I had that access, and nobody even blinked. They were clueless how important that information could have been. I mean, think about it. Somebody is in rehab for drug use, and that person works in design, weapons design or something like that. That was a treasure trove. I'm glad that they didn't bite.
Yeah, because they would have helped pay for someone's.
I would have done a lot of damage to the country I love now, and it would have made me also very uncomfortable. In those days, I would have had to actually print out this information and then copy it. It would have required a lot of overtime and put me at some risk, even though I was known as a hard worker and I worked a lot of overtime anyway. But anyway. They didn't have a clue, again, in 86, I met one person who was from a different, I think that he was in industrial espionage, and he asked me if I could get my hands on either software or hardware which could not be sold to countries of the Warsaw Pact. I stole a computer program, the source code, but I couldn't get my hands on anything else because you couldn't go in a store and get stuff that was on the don't export list. So, but they asked me, just pay a little more attention to the internet, see what you can do there. They didn't have a clue. Not like the Russians now. It's completely different. They were well behind, and they sort of knew that they were behind. That's why the guy asked me, "Can you get your hands on some technology?" So the one task, there's two tasks that I performed reasonably well, even though one of them I didn't think was that important, but in hindsight, I think it was somewhat important. They asked me to periodically report on the reaction of Americans to things that happen in the world. And I always give the shooting down of the Korean airliner by the Soviets. You're familiar with that? It was a civilian airplane that strayed into Soviet airspace, and it was shot down, and all the people on board were killed. And it created a huge outrage. And they wanted to know how American people react to that. And that was the only time I openly criticized the Soviet Union. I told them, I didn't use those words, you idiots just made a really big mistake. We were in the middle of détente, and all of a sudden you shoot down an airliner. That just like killed everything for a while. So, but periodically I sent some other reactions of people that I interacted with. For that purpose, I joined a club at the college where some professors and students interested in foreign policy were exchanging their opinions. And in hindsight, I think it was valuable because it came from an American rather than from a diplomat. And I pretty much guarantee you, even if they maybe quoted some of their the people that they interacted with, they were known to be diplomats, so Americans wouldn't be quite honest with them. So my information was more authentic, and it probably helped to convince the Soviet government to award me the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union, which I received just a couple of months after my last visit to Moscow in '86. I forgot to bring that medal with me, but it was sent to my German family at the time I received it. I got the notification via Morse code. And that, again, it was the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union. A high-level KGB official must have told the government agency, it was the highest level, that we have a man in the U.S. who operates like an American, and he is a real asset. Come on,
dude,
give him something.
Yeah.
And of course, that makes me, as the messenger of that information, makes me look good too. Look who I have here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this was valuable. What could have been valuable, but I never got any feedback, and I can't speculate on that. I was told to operate as a spotter. So, anybody who I met, and it was always, every time I was in Moscow, the mantra was always more contacts. We need more contacts. Well, I have only so much time. I have a full-time job. I didn't say that. But particularly while I was in college, and also some folks that I worked with, I would profile as potential candidates for recruitment simply because they had some of the attributes that we now summarize with the acronym MICE. You're familiar with MICE?
No.
That's an international thing that MICE is known. I was told MICE by, I think, FBI or CIA. So the ways to recruit somebody is through money. That's M. I, ideology. Okay. C, coercion. And E is ego. Money is the weakest one because the other side can pay even more. We thought in those days ideology was key, was the best. Not necessarily communist ideology. That was in the past. Any kind of ideology, even if you're like frantic about global warming, or you're a peacenik, or or you are a huge fan of Israel, and you know that Israel had some spies in the U.S., and you can recruit under false flag. Anybody who is obsessed with something, okay, and of course, coercion, drug use, and that kind of stuff, and money. If somebody is in monetary difficulties, and it is not necessarily for themselves, but it's also for like taking care of people that they love, and they are in situations where the money is needed for medical treatment that is not covered by insurance, and it could be very expensive. Anyway, so I was supposed to operate as a spotter, and I lost count, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 fellow students who I thought eventually would wind up in positions where they could be valuable to us. In those cases, the us was still the Soviet Union. Now the us is the United States. Mm-hmm. And I never once got a hint as to whether they were going to pursue one of those people. They may have, I don't know. And again, other than the decoration, the Order of the Red Banner, I never even once heard them say good job about anything. Anything. I mean, there was just like they even kept, the report card a secret from me.
So let's jump into, when you started working towards deciding to leave the KGB. Obviously, there's one massive development in your life that kind of helped with that decision making. But
I wasn't working towards, fate was working towards that without my willing participation. Let's put it this way. I did participate in it. As I told you already, I had this pretty girlfriend who was very safe. She was beautiful. She was pleasant. She was safe to live with. She could not have possibly thought I was not fully American. At one point, she confided in me that she was illegal in the country. I said, huh? Well, yeah, I was a flight attendant with Guyanese Airways, and I decided to stay here. And then I paid some money to marry an American. It's the underground thing. Mm-hmm. And this guy took the money and ran. He never filed for me. I said, oh my God, and I felt for her. Damsel in distress syndrome. And then she asked this interesting question. She asked, well, can we still have a relationship if I marry another man? I said, huh? Well, it was passive-aggressive. She really wanted to ask me, can you marry me? And it worked. I said, look, I don't want you to take another risk. Let me do some research, see if I can do that for you. And she introduced me to a friend of hers who had gone through the same process. He had married a woman, and he told me in detail how the process works. And I said, we can handle that. I have the right documentation. I have a good job. We just need to prepare for the in-person interview. And the in-person interview was meant to find out whether we actually lived together. You could be married on paper, right? So they would take the two applicants into separate rooms and ask them the same questions, like describe your living room. What kind of a TV program are you watching together? And all this stuff. Well, with my imagination, I could figure this out, and at least could figure out most of the questions. And so I said to her, we got to practice this. Well, it wasn't necessary, because this is where I talk about fate or the hand of God or whatever you want it to be. She decided to be a little bit underhanded, because I told her, once you get your green card, we're going to get divorced again. I'm not, because I was still in love with my German wife, and I knew I would go back to her, period, end of story. I just wanted to help her. And I didn't want for her to have the idea that we're going to live happily ever after as a couple, to be proactive. And she said, okay. And then she decided to get pregnant. Yeah, that was a unilateral decision. She stopped taking the pill, and she got pregnant because she decided that there were plenty of other examples of friends of hers who kept a man that they wanted to keep that way, to have a child. Well, and so she gave birth to a baby girl. And initially, I took really good care of her, even though, and I didn't resent her for it. Let's put it this way. I didn't want to really just like leave her to her own devices. So I put her on my insurance. So she had good care for giving birth and good care for the baby when she needed care right after birth. She was under glass for a while because mom had lost. She was bleeding before she even got to the hospital. But baby eventually turned out to be okay. I got an apartment for them, and I bought the groceries for about 6 months, and then the rent was raised to a point where I couldn't afford 2 apartments anymore. So I decided to find something where we can move in together. And mind you, I was still spying, right? I found a place that had a long hallway at the far end from the kitchen and the living room and the bedrooms was one more room, and I made it into my office. And I told Penelope, that's her name, I told her, when I'm in there, I must not be disturbed. And I still listened to shortwave radio, and I still did secret writings in there. She was very, very obedient in that respect. She never had a clue, okay? But what happened now is that I watched the girl grow up. And you aren't there yet. If you ever had a baby girl, most men will agree with me. We fall in love with these girls more than we love our wives. It's the kind of love that is irresistible. It's unconditional. And the kid was so beautiful, so pretty. And she had great eyes, curly hair, and a great smile. And I didn't know that I was in love with her, really, but I knew that I needed to find a way to take care of her. I mean, I had no responsibility, and I wouldn't want to shirk that. But any solution that I came up with, because I knew my time was close to being up, and we got into the 10, 12 years. I was already in the U.S. 10 years when the event that I'm going to describe in a second happened. So I could not find a way to support her remotely other than asking the KGB for help. And that would not have been received very well because that had meant that I had been operating completely out of the sandbox I was supposed to be in, right? Broken the rules. So, and there was nothing else. I couldn't engage somebody living in the United States to help me out so I could send this guy money because they would have wanted to know why, right? So it wouldn't have worked. So I saw no way out. And that's when my hand was forced. Again, at the time I made the decision to stay, just moments before I made that decision, I was still leaving. But this was the situation. We had this one protocol which was called emergency protocol, which would be initiated with a signal at a certain spot. If I set the signal, that means I am certain that I'm being under surveillance. I'm running, so I'm getting out of the country. I had reserved documents, hidden someplace in a park in the Bronx. Okay, so I would have made my way to Canada. And if they set the signal, they they tell me get out of the country immediately simply because we have reason to believe that you're going to get arrested very soon. And that signal, in my case, was a red dot, sort of pretty big red dot, so you won't overlook it. Every other signals were chalk marks. This was about a fist-sized red dot on the support beam of the elevated A train going from Queens to Manhattan, and they knew that I would pass by that spot on my way to work. So in one day, it was December 1988, and it was early in the morning. It was dark, and there's the red dot. I mean, it hit me like really hard because that was the last thing I wanted at that point. In different circumstances, I might have been relieved. It's over, I can go. Because the emergency procedure stipulated you must now not go to work. You must not go back home. You must not, if you have to collect money, collect the money and then run to the Canadian border with your reserve documents. Okay? And I went numb and did nothing. So I went to work and stared at my computer screen all day. Couldn't get any work done. The same thoughts were circulating in my brain. And I came to the conclusion I still had a little more time to stall because nobody knew that nobody knew that I was alive. Nobody had certain knowledge that I wasn't ill. Nobody knew that whether my radio was working well. So I had some time. So I was pushing the decision off. I couldn't go. I could not leave. But I don't know if I should stay, because if they're right, I'm going to wind up in jail. I'm no good to my daughter either. So I could have easily, at that point, rationalized it. They're probably right. I got to go. And I would walk away guilt-free. It is just what it is. But that was not the person I had become. And because there's this powerful force of love that I was still not fully aware of, that took like thinking about it after the fact and what I did and how I did it. So I stalled. On Thursday, I had my regular shortwave transmission, and they were a little bit more verbose and told me that we have. It's pretty much I am quoting from memory. We have reason to believe that the FBI is investigating you and you're in danger of being arrested. Why? I can't guess. The FBI, the folks that I worked with, couldn't guess, but they were very nervous, as I already indicated. And there may have been somebody, a mole in the U.S. government, low-level mole, who said, we're investigating an illegal, and they figured it might be me. Who knows? Because there was another illegal in New York at the time. Maybe he was under investigation. Mm-hmm. I got to a point when I couldn't stall anymore, and this was when another morning I'm going to work, waiting for the train, and there's this man that's coming from my right in a black trench coat, short guy. He comes up very close to me, pretty close, like maybe this close here, like about a foot, and whispers into my ear, "You gotta come home, or else you're dead." That's not the nicest words that I've ever heard in my life. Now, it was decision time, because now they knew that I knew that they knew I was alive and well, and if I don't follow the orders, then I'm defying them. Why? Defection? And so it was decision time. And in the next radio transmission, they asked me for a dead drop operation, because they didn't have feedback why I couldn't go. Maybe the reserve documents weren't there anymore. Okay, so they said, okay, now he knows, and they called me to a dead drop operation, and at that point, I decided to go because it was about travel money and a passport. So I was going to collect at least the money, but I had not made the decision to leave. This was in a park on Staten Island. The drop site I found, and I described it. You couldn't miss it. It was the entrance to the park to a sandy roadway. There was off of a street that had a street sign right in front of that roadway. You couldn't miss. Mm-hmm. And then you count the steps, and to your left, I have a picture of that. No, I don't have a picture of that. I'm sorry. I have a picture of another drop site. And to the left, there was a fallen tree, a big one amongst a lot of little ones, and you were supposed to deposit the container at the end of the stump, so to speak. So, and the time that container was going to spend there, if the operation is conducted professionally, was about 5 minutes. So I go there with a flashlight. It was dark already. There was nobody in the park. It was in the winter. And, this was supposed to be an oil can, crushed oil can, and there was no oil can. I knew exactly where to go. I mean, this was my spot. I found it. And so I figured maybe the guy made a mistake and he dropped it someplace close by, and I spent another 10, 15 minutes going around, and there was nothing. And so I decided, that's it. Gotta go. Gotta leave. And the moment I step out of the park, my subconscious made the decision. That was not a result of any kind of analysis. 3 words, I am staying. Now, tell me if that was a rational decision. It was not. It was based on my rational thinking that I already explained to you. Staying had the danger associated with it of going to jail or even being subject to assassination based on that quote-unquote threat, mm-hmm. which could have been just inability to speak English properly, and maybe you wanted to say, you're busted, or something not like dead, and not have the word dead in it. So, but that you had to take it somewhat seriously, and leaving everything that was good for me was over there. It was my wife, who I still loved. We had a son together, and I knew I would go back as a conquering hero, and had a good life as a courier for the KGB. They had plans to keep me on, of course. I mean, I was a seasoned agent. That was the last time we spoke. There was during a goodbye banquet, I think the head of the Directorate S at the time, they were never introduced to me, but he was the senior guy at the banquet. He told me that, and when you come back from your assignment in the U.S., eventually you're going to get bored, and we got stuff to do for you. So I still would have had access to the West, could spoil my family, and they even promised me a house, and I would have lived a good life. Never did I anticipate that the wall would come down one day. So I was operating under the circumstances that I would go back to my country, the German Democratic Republic, and be fed and taken care of by the KGB. Everything over there was good for me. So the only thing that was on the scale that was good for me is I could stay with my daughter. And as I'm talking about this, I'm tearing up again, because that won. It's a totally irrational decision. So when it happened one time, I was giving a talk at Microsoft headquarters, and a young lady at the end asked me a question, and the question was never asked before and has never been asked since. She asked me, so, all that crazy life you just told us about, what is the number one lesson you'll learn out of this life? I had to think for a little bit, and then I said, It may sound trite, but it's true. Love conquers all, because in my case, it conquered all the fears that I should have had that were involved in making that decision. And it worked out, but the odds were pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the question always comes now, and if you're like everybody else, it's normal to ask that question: how the heck did you convince the KGB to accept your resignation? Right?
Yeah, not exactly a career you can just leave.
No, you can't. There's a famous scene in one of the James Bond movies where a collaborator with the FBI is meeting with a high-level with the collaborator with the KGB is meeting with a high-level KGB agent, and he tells him that, like, I'm done. I'm not working with you anymore. And the gruff Russian says, "Nobody quits the KGB." Well, I did. I got away with it simply because of my ability to concoct convincing lies.
Was another act of genius, to be honest, with this one.
Yeah, it was. I was inspired because after I made the decision, the next day I sat down and wrote my Dear John letter. I wrote them. I received the message. I know that I'm in danger, and I very much appreciate the concern that you have about me, but I can't come. And then I told them that I had contracted HIV/AIDS. And to make it really credible, I told them how I got it. Not as a homosexual. That would have been kind of odd, wouldn't it? Most in those days, most HIV/AIDS recipients were homosexuals or drug addicts. And there was a requirement. If I had an intimate relationship with a lady, I had to identify her. And so I had a close friendship with a young lady during my college years, and she was on record. I described her, and I put it in context. And I said, first of all, there may be a chance I can be treated here. I'm hoping, but this is how I got it. I had this girlfriend, and her ex-girlfriend was a drug addict, and I got it from her. She got it from him, and I got it from her. They had no reason not to believe that lie, because all they knew about me was that I had every incentive to go back. They didn't know that I was married. They didn't know that I had a child. If they had known, they would have been a lot rougher with me. They didn't check on me. I knew that the moment I got away with graduating as valedictorian from college. They never checked on me. And that was, I think, a hard and fast rule because, again, I said it before, checking on me could have resulted in me being discovered by counterintelligence. So I didn't know that they would believe the lie. So I still, was very cautious with regard to their reaction. I made sure that I wouldn't appear reliably at the same spot at the same time, so that nobody could wait for me. So I would take...
Changing your pattern or life.
Yes, changing pattern, changing the time. I was able to because I had flex time, go to work different times, different routes, take different trains. And surveillance detection was more to check if the FBI really was still after me. And that was a negative. And the last thing I did with regard to FBI, I mailed a letter to myself. That was a skill that I was taught by Moscow. You write a letter to yourself with a fictitious return address from a big apartment building. And then you use a gummed envelope, and you don't moist the entire gum section. You leave an inch unmoistened. And at least in those days, letters were opened by machine. humans are, I mean, even the most skillful, there are not too many skillful
we're pretty
humans
rough.
who don't, yes. And then automatically, this is what I was told, when the letter is closed, they put moisture on the entire gum section. So when you, and I did that. And when you open the letter and this one section is still dry, you know nobody opened it. I did that. And after 3 months of these precautionary measures, I became deliberate. This is when you talked about, planning and going forward. That's when I started planning. And I said to my then wife, you always wanted to live in a house. Let's go save some money, and next year we move to a house. And that's when I started the construction of my version of the American dream. I was not yet 100% anti-communist. I want to make it clear. It wasn't the good life, which I hadn't had at that time. I was still living in a pretty lousy apartment. I was making decent money, and I had a vehicle, but it was a used vehicle with 110,000 miles on it, and eventually that went up in flames in the garage. So it wasn't the good life. It wasn't a good life, and it wasn't the understanding that communism was bad. It was love. That's all it was. Now, when the wall came down, after I was able to do some research, I realized that I had served the wrong cause, and even obviously East Germany was gone, so my loyalty to my country didn't exist anymore, and I knew the loyalty had been misplaced to begin with. So all of this made me into sort of a private middle class kind of guy who didn't want to be involved in politics anymore. Who wasn't very much interested in what's going on in the world. I just wanted to be a private person, to make a good life for the family and have the good life in myself, knowing that I would never return to the country of my birth, because I was not going to say hello to the FBI. Well, they said hello to me.
I was about to say, people are probably wondering then how exactly you ended up releasing, all your information and everything. So can you maybe break down Vasily Machkin, probably not saying that correct, and then how the FBI evidently did close in?
Yeah, I already had a really good career as, at the time I was still hands-on IT specialist, but I got a promotion every year. I moved from the first house to a second house that was much bigger, and it was in the country in Pennsylvania. And, I was doing well. And there was I sort of had almost forgotten that I once was a spy. I put this in the far places in my brain that I couldn't access that easily anymore. I was just a middle-class American and intent of climbing up the ladder and making more money. I had become, a consumer rather than a spy, right? So what happened was, again, the decision of somebody else that changed my life again. So there was Penelope made one decision. The first decision was the guy who invited me to come into the, because I didn't volunteer. He decided to recruit me. There are a few others like that, but I don't. It gets too much detail. But these are the major ones. This decision involved an archivist in the archives of the first directorate Espionage. He was the senior archivist. He oversaw the move of all the documents from the Lubyanka, the headquarters in Moscow, Red Square, to Yasenova, the new headquarters. And he had studied a lot of these files, and I think he developed, and I'm not sure if that guess is correct, but I may have read it someplace that his son had become very ill, and there was a possibility of his son being getting treatment in the UK, and he was not allowed to take his son to the UK. So he developed this phenomenal hatred of the UK that made him do something very dangerous. Over the period of several years, he would copy bits and pieces of information on little small pieces of paper and smuggle them out day after day in his underwear and in his socks. That's what he shared. And then he took the stuff to his dacha and transcribed it with a typewriter, and the resulting paper he buried in the ground in his dacha. And in 1991, that was after the Soviet Union collapsed, he initially went to the embassy in Moscow, the U.S. embassy, and asked for the CIA. And the CIA person who was standing guard there outside, or who talked to him first from the CIA, he said, "We're not interested. This is all stuff that's old," and he probably thought it was a dangle anyway. Yeah, okay, that was not a good career move, because this guy by the name of Vasily Mitrokhin didn't give up. He went to, I think, Estonia and asked for the MI6. And MI6 was very interested. And they managed to get all this stuff across the Russian border, get it to the UK, and eventually shared information with the FBI. And amongst that information, there was just a really small bit. It says there was, may still be, an illegal undercover agent by the name of Jack Barsky, who lives in the Northeast. That's all they needed, because they searched his Social Security records and they found one Barsky that got his Social Security card late in life. That did not fit well with my otherwise profile as being a successful programmer analyst. Mm-hmm. And, having graduated from college, that didn't make much sense, right? I don't know if they found the valedictorian, but so that's when they started opening a case against Jack Barsky, but very carefully, because the one thing that they knew that I wasn't illegal. They also knew that I was highly trained, because I had survived 19 years without being discovered. 19, yeah. I think I broke the record, at least the record of known survivability. The record was held by one Rudolf Abel, who was... he was supposedly the head of the Rosenberg spy ring. He was not. He was not even much of a facilitator. He was an illegal, and his reputation exceeds far beyond what he really did. That also came out of Mitrokhin, by the way. So I'm not pulling this out of a hat. But he survived 10 years before he was caught, and it was also because of betrayal. But anyway, I survived 19 years. And so they knew that I was highly trained, and if they get too close to me and I'm still active, I'm going to run. Mm-hmm. So they were very, very careful. They started initially observing me from a distance. The lead agent, the house I lived was at the bottom of a little hill, and then down the hill there was a little river, and then there was another hill on the other side, and he put himself on that hill and acted like a bird watcher. He had some bird books next to him and had binoculars, and he watched me, interact with my children, and he apparently also interpreted my body language with regard to interacting with a wife, and we were constantly arguing because she had become very jealous and was complaining a lot and thought that I was cheating on her, and it became a rather unpleasant relationship because of her jealousy that was totally unjustified. I never thought of having a relationship with another woman. I just wanted for her to be calm, and we lived down our lives in peace. We had kids to take care of. And 2 years they spent watching me. there was also a situation where life actually confirmed fiction. They had the house next door. This was in the country. There was only one neighbor, one close neighbor was the house next door. Went up for sale, and they bought it. The FBI moved 2 agents in there for a while.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. But the agents eventually were withdrawn. The idea was for the female to get in touch with my wife then, because there was some indication that we might be a couple engaged in espionage.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because one day Penelope flew to England, and she was followed by MI5 all the way. But she went to visit an uncle who lived there.
Mm-hmm.
But the red flag went up, and there was another red flag. The friend I was talking about, who took me aside and called me that I'm behaving like an a-hole, was a Cuban national. Okay, he had come to the United States with his parents, and he did well financially. He had he bought a couple of apartments in Manhattan, and one of them was rented to a Soviet diplomat. So we're talking about international espionage conspiracy here. La, da, 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 da.
Yeah, too many pieces are adding up.
Yeah, so now it got to a point where they had to decide to go for the kill. And when they went for the kill, that was after they had installed a bug in my kitchen and overheard an argument I had with Penelope, who again was accusing me of unfaithfulness. And I decided to use the nuclear option to convince her that I was never unfaithful. And I told her my past, and I told her, see what I risked. What I risk, I was once an agent, and the risk that I took to stay with you and Chelsea was huge. Why would I want to go for another woman? Well, it backfired, first of all, because now I was even more untrustworthy because I was an agent, an ex-agent, right? But it backfired even more. But that was not a real backfire. That actually helped the FBI to move in, which was good for me in the long run. But somebody overheard this conversation in FBI headquarters down there in Pennsylvania. I think it was in Allentown, if I'm not. Could have been in Philadelphia. Anyway, down there in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, and so they decided it's time to say hello, and so that's what they did. Now there was management within the FBI at that time, and even afterwards, wanted me in jail. So that was a real danger that I was still faced with, not knowing what would happen to me. You want me to talk about the end of this thing?
Yeah, you can. I'm actually.
Yeah, the question is automatic. So what happened? How did they do it? It was a very well prepared, very carefully prepared and executed operation. So they knew I commuted from Newark, New Jersey into Pennsylvania, going west on Route 80, Interstate 80, and then having to cross over the Delaware Bridge into Pennsylvania just before the Delaware Water Gap. And so you cross that bridge, you have to slow down. There's a toll gate, and in those days, and maybe still, you had to put a quarter in or something, and you come to a stop. And this is what Joe, the lead agent in that case, told me afterwards. They actually rented a state trooper, told him to stop me when I come, and waved me over and said, he said, routine traffic stop, could you please pull over? Okay, sure, why not? And if I had still been an agent, the next command would have alerted me that this was not routine. He said, "Could you please step out of the vehicle? That's not routine. Routine is license, registration, please." So, okay, I stepped out. Like, again, I had forgotten that I once was an agent.
Yeah, you've been living a normal life.
It was so normal. So, and as I step out and I stand there, I sense that somebody's coming from my right, and there's a person who isn't that far away from me. And as he walking towards me, he flips open this ID. At that point, I knew what that was.
Yeah,
I knew that could be only FBI. And he came up and he said, "Yeah, FBI, we would like to have a talk with you." That was the, besides the red dot and the sentence that we have doubts about our identity. Next to those, this was the most dangerous situation I felt I was in, because I had no clue. I knew now.
You were made.
Yeah, and the danger was that I could go to jail. And the danger to my family was, which was more important to me emotionally, because I had put them in danger. I would have felt guilty for the rest of my life if my wife would be deported, because she was in the country illegally, because she was in the country citizen because of me.
Yeah.
And my children could become, orphans, wardens of the state. So that was immediately what went through my mind. And it got a little more interesting when Joe asked me to step into his vehicle, and his partner was sitting on the left in the back, and he had his gun strapped to his ankle. So it was really nicely visible. It's a little message, this is serious, buddy. Interesting. First of all, Joe, afterwards, many months later, he would share with me what I looked like. I went from like normal looks to being completely white. All the blood left my face. But he also confirmed that I recovered rather quickly, because within 3-4 minutes, I asked, "So am I under arrest?" And the answer was just a plain no. And then Joe made an invitation, so to speak. It wasn't a direct one, it was an indirect one, but that gave me hope. He said, he turned around and he was driving the vehicle, but he quickly turned around and he said, I think he called me Mr. Barsky, "That may not be the worst day of your life." That gave me hope. That also triggered my next sentence, which was instinctive, because I figured, you got to make these people like you, because you know that when people like you, they treat you better than if they don't like you. So I said, "So what took you so long?" Which, by the way, is a famous quote that Rudolf Abel also told the people when they came up with him, when they introduced themselves to him. And, they couldn't avoid a smile, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I just have a strange, odd sense of humor, whimsical, I still have it.
Yeah.
My former wife, the most recent wife, when I first interviewed on the phone, she came, and I thought I was very serious. It was a phone interview, and her mother asked her, "How did it go?" "Oh, he's got a real odd sense of humor." Okay, so that's me. So that worked well, and then they took me to a motel, and it was well prepared. It was an L-shaped motel. They had rented one wing,
mm-hmm.
and at the entrance of the wing and at the intersection with the other wing, there was an armed guard with a submachine gun. You make an impression, right?
Yeah, you're feeling good.
There do you think I was scared at that point? No, because I knew there was a talk coming. All right, when he said, when he said it may not be the worst day of your life, that means there was hope. I didn't know what that was. It could have been like, we throw you in jail for 3 months or whatever, something not really that pleasant. And so they took me to a room right in the middle of that one floor that was maybe like the hallway was maybe like 15 or so rooms, right in the middle. They told me that, Joe told me they had rented the entire thing, but they still wanted to have a buffer. I don't know, whatever. And so I walk into the room, and there was something that they did that was a little bit childish from my angle. They had some information plastered on, some cardboard, and there was some pieces of information. I remember 2 of them that were on there. There may have been more. The name of a convenience address in Austria where I sent letters to in secret writing to, and my cover name, Dieter. There may have been a couple of others, but I immediately, so I was back to my sharp self. I immediately realized
the training kicked right back in.
Yeah, immediately realized it's not the training. It's almost self-training, right? It wasn't like structured training, but that you have to be alert at all time. And I realized this was all dated information. So if they wanted to fake me out that we know everything about you, that was not true. So I was very comfortable telling them, I took the initiative. I said, we sat down and I said, I know that one thing that for my family and myself to get out of this situation with the least amount of damage, I have to share everything that I know, and I'm fully prepared to do so. And then they started asking questions, and it was about a 2-hour, not an interrogation, it was an interview. And then they allowed me to call Penelope to tell her, I'm sorry I'm late, but, I was working late, and told me, you may go home now. Somebody had driven my car to the motel, okay? So I could get in the car and drive home, not after I was introduced to the head of the surveillance team, and that was a sizable team. And he looked really tough, that was the last tough guy. He said, okay, if you think you can run, it's not going to happen. We got every intersection covered. Well, at that point, they probably knew what my situation was. They may not have digested it completely. That I don't know if they knew that I was originally from Germany. But if they had known that, they knew I had no place to go.
Yeah, I was going to say.
No place. And I was a dead agent to the Russians. The Germans would have looked at me like, and I couldn't take my family with me either. So and none of that would have made any sense. But, they had to take that precaution. God forbid if I do run, So I didn't say a word. And quite frankly, I may have been able to run anyway because I had a back door out of my basement that led into nowhere. I would have had to walk through the woods and stuff like that. I don't think they had everything covered there, but anyway. So, and then we discussed the future procedure, which was going to be a very thorough debrief. And I sat with Joe Riley, the lead agent, for several weeks. I forgot how many weeks, for a 2-hour debrief. And he asked me to spill out every memory of my life, of my recruitment, of my training, of everything. He wound up knowing more about me than I could. I had to rediscover occasionally when I wrote my memoir. So, and at that time, this was the time when I was in limbo. because there was no promise.
Mm-hmm.
It was my statement. They accepted it, and then it was interviews. There was no, if you tell us everything, there may be a way to citizenship.
You had to trust.
I had to pass a lie detector test. That was protocol. They couldn't have said, well, yeah, the guy is good, we can trust him. No, I had to pass a lie detector test. And for you, as a great interest in intelligence as well as your viewers, I want to tell you about this lie detector test. It's not anything like is depicted in movies or TV series. It's completely different. There's no light in your face. There's no aggressive questioning. It's like this. I knew all the questions in advance. They were given to me in writing to read them over. And then we did a practice run. The interviewer was sitting behind me, and the questions and answers were all whispered. And the answers, there was only 2 answers, yes or no. That's it. Whispered, yes or no's. And I knew the questions in advance. And no light. And no pressure whatsoever. Fully relaxed. And so then the real interview started. They wired me up. And I was very happy. There was nothing I was at all uncomfortable with. If they had asked an open-ended question, forget it. That marijuana smuggling would have popped right into my head. So when he was done, he took the paper out of the machine and went back and looked at it for 20 minutes. He came back and he said, "I'm sorry, you failed one question." I said, "Huh?" And I asked him, "Can you share with me what question that was?" And he said, "Yeah," and he read it. And I knew, I had no doubt, I answered all the questions honestly, and I didn't have to think about any of them. It was all, I already knew the answers. I knew the questions. But then I detected something, and apparently that was all planned. I'll tell you in a moment
I know the question,
why it was planned. I asked him, I know I said to him, "There's something odd. This question has a double negative." He said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Let me think about it. Next day I was told I have to go repeat the test, and I had to answer only that question. And I passed it. It was rephrased as a positive, as a declarative. And at the time I didn't realize what that really was. That was a control question. I had to fail it because if I don't fail it, that means I could be lying in the answers to the other questions. It was so subtle that I had to just process for a moment, and it had to register. And I once spoke at a conference of polygraphers, and I asked a couple of guys the same question. Was that a control question? She said, "Yep, that's how we operate."
That is incredible.
Yeah, and once I passed that question, I was told I will get a green card and there's a path to citizenship. Hallelujah.
Well, Jack, man, that's obviously an incredible story. I mean, from up and down, I think we went through so much today, but I mean, especially just showcases, what we were talking about at breakfast. So many little things in your life can make such a massive impact. And, through everything, I got to say, I'm glad it worked out how it did because, like we said earlier today, one little thing changes and you're not sitting here today. And I couldn't be more happy that you are. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Can I volunteer one more example of what you just pointed out? That,
Absolutely.
One little thing changes. There's a number of things that had to happen for me to talk to you today, and that is for me to become a public figure. I had no intention of going out in public. And I was just going to like live a quiet life. At one point, on the urging of my children, I said, "Okay, I will write my autobiography, my memoir," because they were so insistent on it. But I reached out to a number of literary agents, and nobody even. I had one response out of 20. Nobody believed my story. So okay, nobody wanted to touch that. Yeah, because I gave him a little overview, not this long as we talked. I didn't send him a manuscript. So I knew nobody would be interested in this. So I had no reason to go public. So to compress this a little bit, you have to go back way into the past. My former wife grew up in Jamaica. She had 4 half-brothers. All of them had the same father, different mothers. And one of her half-brothers, she met a couple of them, but the one that's critical in this particular story, they lived at the same time in a similar place, but never met each other. She was later on when she came to the United States, she was informed by one of her half brothers here that there's a half brother in Germany, and she got in touch with him. Now, it so happened that one day a French painter went to Jamaica. He was an itinerant painter. He traveled all over the world. He liked Jamaica a lot. He stayed there for a while. He did a lot of paintings, and he befriended young Richard. He was a cute little kid with a poor mother, and he thought of even adopting the guy, the little kid, but he figured out, that my life, I'm going to go to another country and so forth. But they did keep in touch. Now, Richard's mother decided to take Richard to Germany. I don't know what triggered that, but she had to do that. And I tell you, there's more to this backstory than what I can share because it gets too long and it would have to be written down. I haven't even written down the entire story in its entirety. There are 24 dots that have to be connected for me to be able to be here today with you. So, Shauna then, so Richard grew up in Germany, and Shauna had interacted with him on social media. Now, this painter had met throughout his travels an executive from L'Oreal. This guy had a summer home in Hudson, New York. Nice home. I've been there. It was with a waterfall, private waterfall. Mm. And Hudson, New York is an artist community. Mm-hmm. So he met the painter and invited him to visit one day. And the painter was so impressed with that place, he bought a farmhouse next door to store a lot of his paintings. And he would spend his summers there. And one day, we are in our home, the phone rings, and Shauna answers the phone. That's my former wife. And I felt that she was talking to somebody she was familiar with, but she asked a lot of interesting questions. So, and then she turned to me and she said, how far is Hudson from here? I said, it's about an hour drive. Oh, it so happened that Richard had called her, tell her the following. So I'm in the U.S., so where are you? Well, it's a town in New York, in Hudson, New York. And that's how she asked me, how far is Hudson? He came there not to visit her. He didn't. He wanted to visit the painter.
That is crazy.
Okay? So, now, obviously, Richard is there. I pick him up. He comes to our house. He knew that I had grown up he knew that I had moved to the United States. I had grown up in Germany. And no more. And so he asked me, so how did you manage to get here? And I said, because his sister managed to get to the United States as a bilingual secretary with the United Nations. So he asked me, how did you get? I said, I had some help from the government, whimsical humor. So which government? The American or the German? I said, no, the Russian. Huh? And Richard now became really curious. He said, okay, sit down. And so he asked me questions, and I started spilling the beans. And he took notes, a page worth of notes. And then he got up, and his eyes got like really big, and he said, I'm going to take that to Germany, and this is going to be big, huge. He was right, but I thought he would be like stupid because all the literary agents weren't interested in my life. Why would he, who was at the time a conductor at the German railroad, make this into a big story in Germany? What would, really? So I didn't say a word. Bye-bye, Rich. He went back to Germany. A week later, I get a phone call. He happened to have a friend who had connections in interesting circles in society because he was a student of Sheng Wei, or whatever you pronounce it, the Chinese art of placing furniture and plants in a certain way.
Shui.
Feng Shui, yeah, very good. Every time I say it, I mispronounce it. And one of his clients was the number one female journalist in Germany, worked for Der Spiegel, the number one news journal in all of Europe. And Richard's friends told her about me. She was skeptical, but she did research. And somehow she, in those days, there was some section of the KGB archives that landed, the Metrokin section, that landed in the UK. And she may have found out that, Jack Barsky was an illegal. So she called me. And she asked a bunch of questions. She was still skeptical, and I said, I was proactive. I said, I'm not going to give any interviews to any newspaper or magazine until my citizenship situation is cleared up. So when I got my citizenship, I immediately applied for a passport and made my Rip Van Winkle trip back into the past, went to Germany. I told Richard, I'm coming to Germany, and he knew exactly what time I will arrive there. And so he arranged for the journalist to know about it. And when I arrived and I stepped into the arrivals hall, I had a camera and a microphone in my face, and I saw Richard standing in the back. He had fingered me. That is the guy you want to talk to. That was the journalist. So she asked me a bunch of questions. Then we went to a cafe. We talked some more. She followed me for about 3-4 days through my past, through my travels into the past, interviewed me very thoroughly. And then she did something that no self-respecting journalist would do. She gave away a scoop. I mean, I was a big story.
Yeah.
Anywhere. But she had met Steve Croft 2 years before at a convention, and somehow she had contact information. She called him up and said, Steve, I got some story for you. Now, I know now why she did that. She wanted Barack Obama. She wanted to get a favor in return. Because Steve Croft was the only one that Barack had one-on-one interviews with. And so when I get back to the Albany area and to my job, I lived in the Albany area at the time, I get a call from the producer. And he says, I'm Dragan Mihailovich. I'm from 60 Minutes. I want to come visit you and talk with you about what we can do with your story. How do you say no to 60 Minutes?
That's where we start.
Yeah. But there were a number of other dots that I skipped over but these were the major dots. This is about 10 of them. I haven't counted them. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but it always carries
So when
back.
I told you informally that I clearly have not been in control in my life for most of what happened, for most of the important things in life, I have been in decent control in very well-defined circumstances. Okay. So you never know what happens if I get on the road now and I come home and I get a phone call and something else is going to happen.